Welcome back guys, it's Colin with the Sun Pirates TCG, and we are here today showing off a couple new lists that you can now build with the newly released ST05 Iron Bloom. So as you can see, purple is now released in the Gundam card game, and even despite the fact that GDO2 Dual Impact will not be released for another few weeks, people are already trying to cook new purple decks, and honestly, these decks are pretty sweet. So with the ones I'm going to show today, we're going to use them as a baseline. Again, not hyper optimized or anything, considering the cards just came out, but hopefully they'll be a good starting point for those of you that have just picked up this product and are looking to incorporate it into your decks. So for this video, I have two deck lists I want to show off, one being purple-blue and the other one being purple-white. But before we do, remember to like the video and subscribe so we can do more Gundam content like this. But without further ado, let's get right into it. Alright, and getting into the blue-purple deck, this is more like an Earth Federation aggro deck, kind of like what you see in blue-green sometimes, but you actually use purple as more of the utility color. So we'll start off with the pilots just to get those out of the way. 4 copies of Amuro, of course, just being the best blue pilot. And then in purple, we have 4 copies of Mikazuki or Mikazuki August. This draws a lot of parallels to Merida Cruz in blue-red. However, one big thing about him is that he can be paired with anything to trigger that damage ability. Obviously, you do have to damage your own units, but you can kind of mitigate that by the way you trade in combat. And also, this can deal a damage to something of any level as opposed to Merida, which is based on what unit she's linking with as far as level goes. And then moving on to the units, we'll start off with the cheap vanillas. We're playing 822, so 4 copies of the Grace Custom, and then 4 copies of the Gym or GM. So just, you know, your typical like really low to the ground stuff. We're also playing some copies of the Rizel, 4 copies to be exact here. Just your typical 4-3. You do want 4 copies of the Rizel specifically, as I'll be also showing off the 2 copies of the Jegan. We are playing a lot of Earth Federations, as I was saying before, so this is just another cheap 1-drop effectively that you can get onto the table very quickly. For the last of the vanillas, quote-unquote, we have 2 copies of the Hyakuren. I started at 4 copies of this to have like effectively like 8 copies of Rizel, but I kept shaving it down more and more just to like find room for other things such as the Jegan. So I think just 2 copies is fine. Having 8 total copies of a 4-3 vanilla might be a little bit overkill, honestly. And then moving on, we do have a ping package, as a lot of people like to call it, with the 4 copies of Guntank and 4 copies of Anksha. Not much to say here, it's just like blue-green and blue-red. It just helps you make some very efficient trades when you just keep turning all your small bodies sideways, right? And then for the level 4s, we have 2 copies of the Barbatos or Barbatos if you listen to the Japanese audio like I did. The second form, it links with Mikazuki, and then it does have a nice ability to get +2 power. So with Mika, you can actually start it off as a 4-5 if you just want to ping one of your random gems or something instead. And if you need to, you can have it ping itself off of the Mika to become a 6-4 attacker, which is really huge, honestly, and it just trades into anything in the game. And also just the fact that it's kind of like playing Vanilla Kshatriya in the blue-red deck, where it's so cheap to make this link pair unit. It just costs 2 to get this Barbatos out, and then 1 to link it with the Mika. So just a really cheap 3-cost link pair out of nowhere. It's really nice to have access to. And then for the other level 4s, we're playing 5 total Gundams, 3 copies of the starter deck, RX-78, because it's just really, really good with Amuro, obviously. And then we're also playing 2 copies of the GDO1 LR Gundam. So the cool thing about this one is that obviously it links with Amuro, we have a bunch of weenies, we get to draw cards easily. But not only that, we also get to pair it with Mika. Obviously it's not a link pair, but with Mika we can mitigate the self-damage because of the repair. And not only that, it still works well to help us draw cards since this can be paired with anything to draw when we have so many weenies out. So I actually like this pairing quite a bit in my testing. And then for the last of the units, we have 2 of the big boy, the Gundam Barbatos 4th form. So it is pretty expensive to cast it for an aggro deck, you know, just being a level 6 guy. But it does have the really cool suppression ability. It is the first of its kind with this keyword ability to just like break 2 shields out of nowhere. And it has some cool applications too, like for example, the on-deploy ability to deal damage in give power to somebody, you can, for example, have a Rizal out, play your Barbatos to ping it, turn it up to 5 power, and it can trade into like another big link pair, like a Gundam link pair, or more importantly, crash into a 5 health base. So now the coast is clear when you do a Barbatos link pair to get in for that suppression for the double damage, right? So there's a few cool applications there. I'm not sure if we really should be playing this in the first place, but it's a pretty cool card to try out. And then for the non-units, as commands go, we have 3 copies of Shove Resolve just to kind of feel back up, you know, just like the other blue aggro decks. And then 3 copies of Fatal Strike. This card is awesome. And as you would notice from the rest of the deck list, you really only need 1 copy of the starter deck for all of these. You know, you get 4 Mikas, you get 4 Grazes. You know, it's just 2 copies of the LR Barbatos, and then, you know, we're just playing 2 copies of Yakuren, which they give you 3 of. But this is the one reason why you would want to get a second copy of ST05, is because it only gives you 2 copies of Fatal Strike. But honestly, this card is really, really strong. If you can, I would recommend trying to finish the playset of this. Honestly, I would like to play the 4th in this list as well. I'm not sure what I would cut for it yet, but this card is just so strong. Killing any level 3 or lower, there's so many applications, such as blowing up a Lafrith, a Zowart, the new Grace blocker out of the starter deck. So there's so many blockers that you can blow up. Oh, not to mention Striker Pack tokens, right? But not only that, but versus other aggro decks, blowing up your enemy Rizal, blowing up an opposing like 2/2, while it doesn't feel the best just to get something off the table when you're trying to win the race, there's just so many things that this card can accomplish. Even blowing up a Zaku link pair is actually pretty nice, so you don't have to like trade a body into it. So yeah, this card is so flexible, it's so strong. And then last but not least, we have just 3 bases. Just 3 Corsica base. It can be whatever you want, really. I just opted for Corsica base as like the additional body that you can play on curve, especially when you're going first on level 3. But there's other options such as like the Nahel Argama, the Isaribi. And on a side note, a lot of people want to try the Isaribi because, you know, it's like a cool Vesalius kind of card for purple. I'm just not sure how consistently you can get that damage requirement for the +2 power, so that's why I just went with something a little bit more like quote-unquote proven with the Corsica base. So yeah, that is it for the blue-purple deck. Like I said before, it's a very low to the ground aggro deck where you just have like a lot of low drops, you get on the board really early, very similar to blue-red and blue-green. However, as opposed to those other color combinations, kind of the draw of playing purple is that, number one, like I said before, you have access to Fatal Strike, which is just such a great removal spell in a game where removal is very hard to come by. And then you also have that added flexibility with the Mika, as opposed to like having to draw link pairs with Merida Cruz in blue-red. Just having that flexible ping plus like your 8 pingers is actually pretty easy to get other early bodies out of the way from your opponent. So otherwise, yeah, like I said before, it's pretty much an Earth Federation style aggro deck, which is a proven archetype that was already pretty good in the current format, and then we just add these extra purple cards for the additional utility, right? I do see a lot of potential with this archetype, even with the limited amount of purple cards we have. I think there's definitely something here that we could be playing even competitively for the next few weeks up until GDO2 drops. Alright, and moving on to purple-white, this one is definitely more in the experimental stages, I would say, but some of the things it was doing I was definitely impressed with, enough so that I want to show it off. So for the pilots, we're starting off with 4 copies of Mika again, and then this time for the other pilot of choice, it's going to be 4 copies of Soletta. So we're actually doing a more low to the ground aggressive academy strategy. And speaking of low to the ground, we have our level 2 1-cost 2/2s with 4 copies of Demi Garrison, and then 4 copies of the Grace Custom. You can also include the White Grace if you would like. And honestly, I wouldn't be super opposed to playing more than 8 copies of the 2/2s for this strategy. And then for level 3s, we have 4 copies of the Hyakuren. Just your typical, like, you know, result beater. Hopefully, eventually we'll get this in other colors as well. And then we also have 4 copies of the Michaelis. We are playing a solid number of commands to enable that ability to make it into a 4/4 beat stick. And of course it's nice that it links with any academy, which is the Soletta right here. And then for level 4 units, it's going to be just 4 copies of this Barbatos second form. Like I said in the first deck profile, it links with Mika to become a big beat stick, break open any base, and then let the rest of your guys come in and deal damage. And then for our quote-unquote boss units, we have at level 5 just 2 copies of the Aerial Permanent Score 6. Of course, the typical line is with Soletta to have a link pair attack immediately into something that you shrank, so you get a really profitable trade in combat. But not only that, but you could also pair it with Mika. Of course, you don't have the link swing, but you can still get something in range of death with the Mika ping, and then use something like a Hyakuren to run over your opponent's rested unit, while also having it shrunken so it would more than likely survive the combat. And then for level 6s, it's going to be 2 copies of the Aerial Rebuild. Like I kind of alluded to before, we're playing plenty of commands to enable this and just get additional value in the late game. And speaking of late game, we have the Barbatos 4th form yet again at 2 copies. This one actually makes a bit more sense in this kind of strategy since we're playing a little bit more into the later game, so actually having that suppression to come up and potentially reduce the number of times we actually need to hit our opponent's face to provide lethal is actually pretty nice. And then for commands, like I said, there's a decent number of them, so starting off with one of the best ones, we have Overflowing Affection. Of course we're in white, and we need to be able to enable our Michaelises and our Aerial Rebuilds, so of course also smoothing out our draws when you only have 2 copies of each of these boss monsters does help as well. And then 2 copies of Striker Pack. It's an additional body that we can play at level 4, you know, because we get the token, but it's also the command in Trash to enable the Michaelis. It's recurable with the Aerial Rebuild, and not only that, but it's also just a blocker in a deck that we don't really have any other blockers, but it can also attack, which is nice. And then 2 copies of With Iron and Blood. This one provides some nice open trades with our units being able to pump one of our 2/2s into 5 power when they try to swing like a link pair arc 78 into it, for example. Being able to ping your Barbatos second form to just like immediately have it run over a base when we don't have the Mika in rotation, or even something as simple as like pinging your Barbatos 4th form and giving it that suppression. So it's just another way to enable that self-damage, to enable a few things, but also actually get some randomly good traits in combat. And then the last but certainly not least of the commands is the 4 copies of the Fatal Strike. So like I said in the first deck profile, this card's just really strong right now, and this was kind of the reason why we tried out something like Purple White Academy. Because this command is so strong anyway, we might as well kind of build around it with the Michaelis and the rebuild. Having this on curve, pairing with your Striker Pack, or with even like a Hyakuren or a Barbatos second form, lets you just play on curve, remove your opponent's most recent threat, just really stay on tempo. And unfortunately, I understand that it's not the easiest right now to get 2 copies of the starter deck, but this is one where the 4 copies of Fatal Strike is just so uniquely powerful to this strategy. And then for the last slot of the deck, we have our base slot, which is just 4 copies of the Isaribi. This one makes a bit more sense in this list than it did for the blue-purple list, in my opinion, because we're also playing with Iron and Blood to kind of enable that 2 power bonus, but also just within like aggressive purple-white strategies. This is the only purple base at the moment, and within white, there isn't really another great white base we can play aside from maybe Kusanagi, for example, since obviously we hardly have any blockers, so we're not going to be playing Archangel, right? But otherwise, yeah, this is the purple-white list. Like I said before, it's pretty experimental. There's plenty of things that could be improved upon in my opinion, but I definitely liked where this one was going, which is why I wanted to show it to you guys. As always, feel free to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below if you have any suggestions for either this one or the blue-purple one that we showed earlier. I'd really love to hear your guys' thoughts, and also just like any general ideas that you guys been having with the new purple cards, which I'm super excited to be playing with now. Of course, the builds I showed today are not the only purple decks that you can build right now. There are ideas for purple-red, for example, where you can combo the ping from Mika with things like Battle of Aces to really get some good removal in. But otherwise, yeah, I think the purple cards that we already have even prior to GDO2 coming out are already pretty reasonable. And if you want to see both of these decks in action, we will have some gameplay videos coming up very soon. So definitely be on the lookout for that, and remember to turn on that notification bell so you know when it's coming up. But yeah, that will be it, guys. As another reminder, be sure to like and subscribe. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next one.